Hey, great, thanks.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope that the symposium is going well. My name is Jerry Knowles. I'm a state representative. I represent the 124th Legislative District, which includes portions of Berks, Schuylkill, and Carbon County. I am the lame duck majority chairman of the House Local Government Committee. And, I love local government. I've been everywhere. I've been a cop. I've been a councilman. I've been a mayor. I've been a county commissioner, and now I'm fortunate enough to be a state representative. But it is good to be a part of any function that the local government commission holds. So I appreciate that. So welcome back to everyone for our next presentation, which is use of deliberative mini publics in local government. And it's going to be from Dr. Stephen Medvic. Deliberative mini publics are increasingly used to provide policymakers with informed, considered feedback from the public on questions of public policy. The good doctor will be discussing their use, focusing on a case study from Lancaster. Just a little bit about Dr. Medvic. He is the Honorable and Mrs. John C. Coco Professor of Government and Director of the Center for Politics and Public Affairs at the second greatest learning institution in Lancaster. He is from Franklin and Marshall, and as a graduate of Thaddeus Stevens, I have to say that, doctor, I apologize. But we used to go over to F&M when I went to Stevens. We would go over to F&M looking for girls. But no, it's a gorgeous campus, and you guys have a great reputation, as does Thaddeus Stevens. And it's good to have you here. So Dr. Medvic's research and teaching interests include campaigns and elections, political parties, the media and politics, and public opinion. So welcome, Dr. Medvic, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Representative. And I'll not argue with you about the best institution of higher education in Lancaster County. Let me share my screen with you if I can. Actually, it's saying its host is host disabled. So I don't know if, can you give me access to share my screen?
I just fixed it, sorry.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. I'm sorry, it's probably my fault because I sent the wrong email address to begin with to get access. So here we go. Are you able to see that?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So let me start at the beginning. Let me introduce myself just again quickly. I'm Stephen Medvic, Professor of Government here at Franklin and Marshall. I'm Director of the Center for Politics and Public Affairs, which many of you know Terry Madonna. This is Terry Madonna's old gig, and so I'm really honored to be the director of this center. And thanks very much for allowing me to present to the symposium today. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I had intended to be there, but a couple of obligations here on campus made it impossible to leave. So let me go through this this presentation pretty quickly and then field any questions that the audience might have. I want to start with just answering the question, what is deliberation? So when we talk about a deliberative forum or a deliberative mini public, obviously deliberation is at the center of the process. And what we mean by that, as one scholar says, is just mutual communication that involves weighing and reflecting on preferences, values, and interests regarding matters of common concern. So I think the key here is that it's an exchange of reasons for preferences and decisions. So when we sit down together and we express viewpoints on some public policy matter, if we're exchanging reasons for why we think what we think, you know, we could persuade somebody to see it our way, but we may also evaluate our own perspective and our own position and may change our mind as well through that process. So it's not a debate, the goal of which is always to kind of win, right? It's not that, but it's really instead to solve problems. A lot of people look at these and think that we're trying to force some kind of consensus among people, and that's not at all required, and it's usually difficult to achieve any kind of consensus. But if we act as though the objective is to reach some kind of consensus, that sometimes allows us to have more productive deliberation. At the end of the day, we may not have consensus, but that if we act as though that's the goal, we can maybe get productive discussions going. So then what is a deliberative forum? It's a relatively new. I mean, it's been around for several decades, but it's been widely used only recently. So it's a little bit innovative, but it's a mechanism for getting informed, and that's an important point, important term, informed, thoughtful feedback on policy decisions from the public. Advocates of this approach say that it improves upon the two primary ways that policymakers get feedback right now, which are polls and town hall meetings. Polls get feedback from a representative sample of the public, so they're beneficial in that sense. They are sort of a microcosm of the larger public, but particularly on complex issues, the feedback you get may not be particularly well informed. A lot of times people will just give you an answer off the cuff, not having thought a lot about the particular issue. On the other hand, town hall meetings or any kind of public meeting where people kind of decide for themselves to show up, they self-select to be in attendance. Those may give you informed feedback. They'll certainly give you passionate feedback, maybe not always super well informed, but people care about the issue. That's why they're there. And so they probably know something about it, at least more than the average citizen. The problem is they're not at all representative of the wider public, right? This is a self-selected group of people who really care about the particular issue being discussed. And so they don't really stand as a microcosm for the rest of the public. I'll describe how these work in just a minute, but I want to say that there are lots of examples from around the world where countries are using this, cities around the world are using it. Canada has held several national deliberative fora, in the territories, various parts of Canada. Belgium has a really interesting model now where they have a permanent body that's a representative sample of the citizenry that sort of sets the agenda for the elected regional parliament. Madrid, Spain did something similar to this, but one government put it in place and the next government that replaced it got rid of it. And Ireland has used these nationwide for some really controversial constitutional kinds of questions and has found some good success using it there. Lots of places around the world, Australia and many other places use them. In the United States, they're a little more rare, but some people say that the model was first designed in the United States in Minnesota, a variant of what we did in the city of Lancaster. Something called a citizens jury was first developed in Minnesota in the 70s. Oregon uses an interesting citizens initiative review panel. So for all of their ballot initiatives, they have a random representative sample of citizens of Oregon who go through the initiative, identify key facts that voters might need to know in order to make sense of the initiative, and then lay out the best reasons for and against the initiatives. And that information is then passed on to voters as they consider the various initiatives on the ballot. At Stanford University, a political scientist named James Fishkin does something called deliberative polling. Again, it's a variation on deliberative fora that we did in Lancaster. They recently in 2019 did something called America in One Room. He had so much money, Stanford's a wealthy institution. He had so much money that they flew 526, I think, randomly selected Americans from around the country to Dallas for a weekend of deliberation where they did some before and after votes to see if people changed their minds on a whole host of issues. It's a fascinating study. And then some cities have been using something that they call deliberative events. Fort Collins, Colorado uses these occasionally. Pittsburgh has used them in the search for a new police chief. They had some deliberative events around the city. I wouldn't really call these deliberative mini publics because they're not randomly selected and the participants are not informed ahead of time about the issue that they're going to be deliberating about. They try to recruit as many people from as diverse a background as possible around the city, but whoever shows up then engages in deliberation. The way deliberative mini publics work, at least as we are using them here at Franklin and Marshall and here in Lancaster, is that first you obviously start with topic selection. This can be kind of top down or bottom up. Top down meaning policymakers might say, here's an issue that we really care a lot about and we need some feedback. So let's just do a deliberative forum on whatever the issue might be. On the other hand, you could do it bottom up. You could do a survey, for example, of a community and say, what are the key issues that you think are most important for policymakers to address, and then do a deliberative forum on one of those issues. Next, you draw a sample of residents who you invite to participate. This is not a purely random sample. It's what we call a stratified random sample, because you want to be sure that certain key demographics or key characteristics of the public are represented in the sample that you've drawn. You offer these individuals that you've randomly selected compensation to participate. It'd be nice if people did it just because they wanted to contribute to the policymaking process, but people are busy, and so you have to you often offer them compensation to participate. And then you provide them information ahead of time. So you do a briefing packet with some information. The trick here is not to burden them with too much information because people will get frustrated and may not show up to participate. But just enough so that they know more than the average citizen, at least, when they show up to talk about the issue. There are also experts who will be on hand during the deliberation, during the forum itself, to answer questions and to provide, some additional information if needed. And then there's guided deliberations. So as small groups of maybe 5 or 6 are led through a deliberative process by trained facilitators. And then at the end, there's some kind of output, usually some kind of product. Sometimes it's votes. You actually ask the people to vote on policy options. Sometimes it's just a kind of sense of the room, and maybe a plenary session where people share their conclusions, the conclusions that they've reached, and then that becomes part of the product of the deliberative forum. So what we did in Lancaster, this is a kind of a case study. It's the first one of its kind, certainly in Lancaster, and to my understanding, the first, or to my knowledge, the first of its kind in Pennsylvania. The Franklin and Marshall, the Center for Politics and Public Affairs, along with our partner, the Center for Opinion Research, we collaborated with the mayor's office. We approached the mayor and said, we have this idea. Would it be of use to you? And the mayor thought that because we were in the process of doing the comprehensive plan for the city, that she would like to learn more about, and the Planning Bureau would like to learn more about future land use in the city. So this was a top-down policymaker saying we need more information from the community on future land use. We pulled a stratified random sample of 33 residents from the city. It was stratified first by making sure that various geography parts of the city were represented. We had at least 2 participants from every census tract, from all 14 census tracts in the city. And then we made sure we had a good balance of age, race, and education levels, so that it was representative of the city population. We offered participants $250 to spend a Saturday with us on campus doing the deliberation. And each of them was, all of the participants were assigned to 6 different sites around the city. So we could have deliberated about land use citywide, but the planners thought that might be a little overwhelming, and it would be hard to kind of get the participants' head around, the issues having to do with land use. So we assigned them to 6 different sites around the city. So they had maps, and they knew quite a bit about their little plot, their little area of the city. We gave them then background information ahead of time. About a week and a half or 2 weeks ahead of time, we sent out a briefing packet that had information about regional planning, about the environment, housing, transportation, economic development, and some equity concerns. And they were also provided then maps and more background information about their particular site that they were assigned to. We worked in conjunction with, the city has a consulting firm working on the comprehensive plan. Those consultants helped to develop that briefing packet, along with some topic experts who added some content to that. So it's a briefing packet of maybe 12 pages, highly graphic, lots of visuals for people. And again, we gave that to them about 2 weeks in advance. 24 of the 33 participants attended the forum, and things come up, people can't attend. You try to get the people that you selected to participate, if at all possible, because they were selected for a purpose. They're representing part of the city. But 24 participants was more than enough to hold the forum. And then we broke the day down into 4 different segments. Each segment had a brief plenary introductory session, and then they broke up into their 6 groups to do their small group deliberations. We had sessions on both regional planning and environment, housing and transportation, and economic development and equity concerns. And then a final small group deliberation to kind of pull it all together, and a final plenary session that ended the day where all the groups reported out what they had talked about and some of the conclusions they had come to. We had topic experts there in all these areas, and so they provided very brief background information, but mostly they circulated the room and answered questions that participants might have. As you might guess, the deliberation was really civil and thoughtful and interestingly very grounded in participants' everyday experiences. And so when experts and academics are in the room, it tends to be maybe more abstract, theoretical, kind of data-driven and generalizable. People in the participants in this forum were really bringing to bear their everyday experiences, their life experiences on the questions they were asked to deliberate about. As I said, it was thoughtful and civil. There's something about the deliberative process where people understand what we're doing here. We're all coming together to try to help solve some problems. And so while occasionally there might be sort of a jerk, in the room, most people are they understand kind of the ideal behavior for a deliberation, and they behave accordingly. We did not ask at the end for any kind of votes on any questions or sort of forced choices on them. And that's for a variety of reasons. If you're interested, we could talk about it. But I think the planning folks didn't really want to come to kind of concrete decisions like that. I think that maybe was a mistake. It's good to sort of force people to grapple with trade-offs, right? And to make hard choices, because that's what policymakers have to make. And so the result is that, what they said in the final plenary session was they wanted everything. It's a pie in the sky kind of approach. We want affordable housing. We want more preserved and expanded green spaces. We want grocery stores and other vital services within walking distance of everyone in the city. We want more transportation options, right? So there was during the deliberations, there was recognition that you can't have it all, that there are trade-offs. But at the end of the day, because we didn't force them to choose between options, they said, well, what we want for our little part of the city, for the site we've been assigned to, is all of it. Now, some of the site's specific suggestions were really creative and reasonable. And so the planners were listening into these deliberations, and they reported at the end that for one site in particular, they've had a hard time deciding kind of what to do with the area. And they've only recently sort of come to some conclusion that they think is workable. And they said what was amazing was the small group assigned to that site came to the same conclusion just in the course of one day. And so it lent some credibility, I think, to the idea that average folks can come together, think through problems with some information, deliberate about it, and come to really good conclusions or make really good suggestions. So the takeaways here, I think, are just that it's really beneficial when policymakers cooperate and are part of the process. The mayor, unfortunately, wasn't able to attend, but a city council member was, as well as the planning bureau folks. And they were there saying, we're really interested in what you have to say. There's no guarantee. We're not promising we're going to do anything that you suggest, but we're going to take it into consideration. And we really want your feedback on this. And so that lends credibility and legitimacy to the process. Sorry, my automatic light just turned off. That lends some credibility and legitimacy to the process. The groups probably should have been asked to make concrete decisions and make choices. I think going forward, when we do these, we will kind of insist on that, because as I said, what we got was not trade-offs, not the hard choices. And so while I still think it was useful to policymakers, it'd be maybe more useful if we had some kind of prioritization from participants. Selection, the process of selecting is very difficult. We're fortunate at F&M to have the Center for Opinion Research, which of course you're probably familiar with the F&M poll that we do. We're very accomplished at pulling random samples. And so, but that's a difficult thing to do. It's difficult to do it well and to do it correctly. And even having done it, I think, well, we had no guarantee that the people that said they would show up would show up. And in fact, as I said, we had about 9 people not come. Going forward, we might build in some alternates who could show up that day, but if they're not needed, then we pay them and they leave. So that adds to the expense. Really important in doing these is balanced background information. So the briefing documents that they get really should have a range of viewpoints about how to approach a given problem or a given issue. And the experts that are in the room on the day of the forum really should represent a range of, reasonable points of view. I mean, if there are some kind of quack ideas out there, maybe those don't have to be represented. We can't represent every single viewpoint that might exist, but within reason, all viewpoints, a range of viewpoints ought to be represented there. And I think we had that at our forum. And then finally, the big barrier to doing this, because usually when I describe this to people, they say, this is a great idea. We should do more of this. The problem is, of course, expense. So it cost us a little over $25,000. I had some grant money that we were able to use to do this, but it's expensive to pull the sample, to pay the participants, a decent amount, an amount enough that is an incentive for them to show up, to pay the experts. So it's expensive. And so if municipalities would like to utilize this format, obviously they'll probably have to partner with some kind of entity like a university or a college that might be able to do this. But I think there are foundations that are interested in this idea and are willing to fund these kinds of forums in many places, in many municipalities. So let me end there, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, to our technician, am I understanding that there is an anonymous attendee who has a question? Am I right on that?
I see that question.
Oh, do you want me to read it, Doctor?
No, I can do it. So the question was, what types of issues lend themselves to benefit the most from these mini publics? I'm thinking about PennDOT 322 connector project in Center County, big, expensive, controversial decisions we made. It's a perfect example. I think that's a really good example. Honestly, this will sound like a cop-out sort of, but I really don't think there's any issue that can't be addressed. I mean, the entire country of Ireland had a citizens' assembly in which they deliberated about abortion. And one of the recommendations was a referendum, a nationwide referendum that should be held, which the country eventually held. I mean, almost any, no matter how controversial, any topic can, if it's done well, if it's facilitated well, could lend itself to this sort of thing. But I think the suggestion from the questioner is a really good one.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Are there any other questions of the good doctor before we close out his portion of the program? Okay, technical person in charge. Am I missing anything? I guess I'm not, but anyway.
I think we're doing good here. We didn't have any additional questions in the room, unless anybody wants to hop up now. We got a microphone for you now. Dave has one.
Great presentation. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Was there any sort of work product produced for the city as a result of the mini public, and has that been used by the city in subsequent deliberations and public meetings?
Yes, that's a really good question. There was a product, there was a report that we produced here at F&M that went through the kind of qualitative information we got, it complete with photographs of the maps that the groups had drawn on, and some word clouds. What were the key words that kept coming up in all the different segments. So we did produce that to the planning department, the planning bureau. I did not, it's a great question about how it's been used. And we've been in discussion with them about, if there's anything we can do to help them disseminate the information. I'm not sure that they've used it publicly yet, but I know that they've been poring over the report and kind of using it in their own deliberations. But they definitely want to get the word out that they held the forum. And we were hoping to get some media coverage of it. And for various reasons, they haven't covered it yet. But they certainly want to get the word out that they held the forum, that we may be doing these in the future, and what the results were, of course, because, in a process like this, transparency is really important. So, I mean, they did announce that we would be holding it, but, the thing is that for a forum like this, it's not open to the public because it's a selected group of people. But they did announce that we were holding it, and I think they're thinking about how to disseminate the results of the report. But that's a very good question. I should say, if anybody's interested in this format, you can find me on the Franklin and Marshall website. You could send me an email. I'd be happy to chat with you about it. We're hoping to do these, I should say also, just very quickly, WITF did one of these that we consulted on just this weekend on climate change, and held there in Harrisburg with residents from around central Pennsylvania. And we are in the process now of raising some money to do one countywide in Lancaster, so for the entire county next summer. So, we have plans to continue to do these as best we can, as long as we can afford it. And I would love to see the idea spread throughout the Commonwealth.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, is there any, go ahead.
Yep. I just have one quick question. Have you started seeing these done using forums like this with Zoom? I know for focus groups, that a lot of focus group folks work in that environment are really utilizing these electronic communications formats.
Yeah, it's a great question, and and people who do this work are just beginning to sort of experiment with and develop procedures to do them remotely like this, because we could do a statewide one on Zoom, and Zoom allows for breakout groups, so you could break into your small groups for deliberation. Certainly nationally, I know that, again, the Stanford team, which had enough money to, as I said, bring 500 people to Dallas, that's expensive. So you could do nationwide ones on Zoom. So I think that is actually probably the future of these, at least at a larger scale. At the local level, face-to-face is still ideal. And so we'd like to do them face-to-face and in person. But if you want to do them at scale for a state or for the nation as a whole, Zoom is a wonderful platform to utilize. So it's a great question. Thanks again for the opportunity to present this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Medvic. And in closing, I really appreciate you taking the time. I think your program, it was a very good presentation.
Great.
And
thanks a lot.
Just getting back to Lancaster, I will tell you that with the exception of the 3 years that I lived on campus at Thaddeus Stevens, I lived in Tamaqua or in the Tamaqua area. And I will tell you that recently I had the opportunity to go back to Lancaster, and my wife and I went to the Fulton Theater and saw Jersey Boy.
Yeah.
Jersey Boys. And I got to tell you, we saw it on Broadway, and it was just as good in Lancaster as it was on Broadway. So
Yeah.
there are so many cultural things, there's so many good things happening in that area, and you can be very proud of F&M and that entire area.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Mills. Right, Fulton's a gem, and as is all of Lancaster. Please come to visit us in Lancaster.
Okay,
Good.
Doctor, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day. So I guess we have 2 more testifiers coming up, or are they, if they are in person, I will give them a period of time to make their way to the.
Yep, they're on their way up to the front. We'll let you know when they're ready. Okay, Representative, we're good.
Thank you very much. So welcome, folks. Our next panel on municipal finance features presentations on the use of tokenized municipal bonds and also on local tax flexibility. First up, we have Seth Trott. He's a 3rd-year student at Penn State Dickinson Law and the editor-in-chief of the Dickinson Law Review. And he will discuss the use of tokenized municipal bonds and how they can help cities issue bonds on smaller principal amounts, making them more affordable for middle-income residents. So Seth, do you want to take off? And then we'll hear from the other 2 ladies, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Sure. Thank you, Representative. Tokenized municipal bonds are essentially bonds that are distributed using blockchain. So tokenization is a concept of taking data from something and importing it into a blockchain. essentially anything that you can derive data from can be tokenized. So they've tokenized art, NFTs, they've tokenized property rights, and they can tokenize anything like a simple financial transaction. One thing that I'm not talking about today is Bitcoin. So this is not like a Bitcoin bond or something like this. This is using blockchain, which is the underlying technology that gives rise to cryptocurrencies like blockchain and Dogecoin or any other kind of coin that you have. So municipal bonds today have a few issues. The concept was really introduced about 200 years ago, and it hasn't frankly changed all that much in that time. We see non-uniform issuances throughout states. States have different ways of doing it. So when investors are looking to purchase municipal bonds, they end up having to essentially learn how that state or how that specific municipality goes about the process and how they can purchase municipal bonds. There is also a high administrative costs and fees associated with bond issuances, especially in the case of low dollar issuances. So you have these administrative costs, these fixed costs that create this almost this floor for the size of the issuance that you can put out. And by reducing some of these costs, you're then able to reduce the principal amount of the bond, the denomination that the investor can invest in. These costs can also make it uneconomical to produce, like I just said, lower principal amounts in these bonds. So the typical investment amount for a bond is about $5,000, and sometimes you can see them go even up to $100,000. And so lower and middle income residents can't really invest in these bonds unless they have $5,000 to put up right away. And so what you see this reduction in the size of the bond market, which creates this almost this artificially limited supply of investors that's then going to raise the interest rate for the municipality through these bonds. And then finally, when you see repayment of these bonds, the people who own them right now under the current process typically reside in higher income areas. You're talking like your New York City, your financial centers, or they're institutional investors like a Goldman Sachs or some sort of commercial bank. So when a municipality like in Pennsylvania is paying back its bonds, that money is not only leaving that specific area, but it's going to a wealthy, large financial area. It's not staying in the local economy. It's not being circulated throughout that economy to contribute to economic growth. Now, blockchain itself is a technology that creates a distributed digital ledger. And what that means is that software architecture, there's two general types. There's centralized architecture, and then there's a distributed architecture. In a centralized architecture, the center of that architecture is a server. So when computers communicate with one another on that network, they have to go through that server, which really governs everything and is the one that allows the computers to interact in a very specific way. They're sort of subject to whatever that server says that they can do. Whereas in a distributed architecture, you have the computers operating and communicating with each other as peers on the network. And that means that they share in resources with each other. They share computing resources, and they have this ability to operate more seamlessly on that blockchain. Or on that network rather. And so what this means actually in practice is that every computer on the blockchain has a full copy of that blockchain on it. So in order to hack a blockchain and change something, you would have to essentially hack into the majority of computers operating on their network. So when you have one of these larger blockchains with maybe 10 million computers operating on it at any time, you would have to hack 5 million and one computers to change any of that information on the blockchain. And it's thought that really the only entities on the planet with the resources available to do that are like nation states. And even if China or somebody or the United States were to hack into a blockchain, the cost benefit analysis, it just really wouldn't be worth the resources needed to do that. So I say all that to say that blockchain is very safe from the outside looking in, and also from the inside looking out, it's difficult to change data as well. So when computers operate on these networks, on these blockchains, they're just recording and verifying the transaction's occurrence. They're not able to change any of the information given in the transaction. And what that means then is that it's very secure from the inside out, because the computers operating on the network aren't able to change it. So the transactions are almost set in stone. So when something occurs, this ledger, you can't change it. Finally, agreements and bond issuances, they can be tokenized using blockchain, and then they can be automated. Repayments can be automated using a smart contract, which is a computer program that operates on a blockchain that sort of automates the execution of an agreement. So, if the first of the month comes and it's coded into the blockchain that's when a repayment goes out, then that payment is automatic, and you don't need trustees to repay bondholders, as I'll talk about in a few moments. So when you tokenize the municipal bond market, it provides municipalities a number of benefits. And essentially what it looks like is that bond transactions are recorded on the blockchain in the digital ledger. And then the bondholders' investments and the terms of the agreement are memorialized on the blockchain. And then this, there's no securities depository necessary to keep track of investors, and that reduces the costs and increases efficiency of bond issuances. Additionally, bond payments, like I just mentioned, can be automated via smart contracts, so you don't need any sort of a trustee to issue payments to investors. And finally, this allows local governments to reduce their reliance on commercial banks. It reduces issuance and trading costs of these bonds, and that allows for the cost reductions to both help the local government, but also to be able to reduce the denomination amount of the bonds that investors can purchase. So I say all this to say that, this is starting to get its roots in throughout the nation in both local and state governments. Colorado just recently passed a Senate bill that allocated some money to their treasury to study the use of blockchain in helping to raise money for the state. The bill acknowledges a number of benefits that I've mentioned and will talk about for tokenizing public debt. And Colorado is also a state that is very technology forward and hopes to be a leader in the nation in blockchain development. Berkeley, California is really the thing to watch right now. They're a local government, of course, and since 2019, they've been trying to create a tokenized municipal bond. They started out having partnered with one company. The company was a little, wasn't run very well and ended up going under, so that slowed their time. But recently in December, this past December, a unanimous vote was passed by the city council to allow Berkeley, California to partner with a blockchain development company to further develop these tokenized municipal bonds. And they're hoping that through that, they'll be allowed to issue this debt in $100 denominations or less, which can expand the market, allow lower and moderate income investors to invest in these things. They're hoping to raise about $4 million to prove the concept, a relatively small bond issuance to purchase the politically neutral fire truck, something that they need. And they hope to really use these tokenized bonds in the future to fund affordable housing development and to help residents purchase renewable energy. They also have plans for a number of other things for this kind of technology once they get it going and prove the concept. But some legal considerations to think about from the federal level, municipal bonds are not, the federal government takes a largely hands-off approach to municipal bonds. The SEC has some anti-fraud provisions in it that have to be followed, but otherwise there's not much regulation from the feds on municipal bonds because it's largely a state entity or a state creation. However, broker-dealers of municipal bonds are subject to some regulation. And so one thing to consider is that if you're partnering with a blockchain development firm, depending on the process and what they're actually doing for the local government to distribute those bonds, that blockchain development company might get captured by these regulations and then have to, be subject to these reporting requirements, which can increase the cost and potentially lower the efficiency of this method of distributing bonds. But generally, the federal government has not acted on the regulation of blockchain and cryptocurrency yet. Just about every session of Congress in the past couple of years has had some bill put up, but that nothing's taken off yet. The White House has looked at stable coins and ways to, which is a digital asset that's tied to a real life asset to reduce volatility. But as of right now, there's really not much regulation, so that's something to watch out for. From Pennsylvania's perspective, from the state perspective, our laws give pretty wide authority to local governments to figure out the on-the-ground processes for distributing bonds. Act 53 controls a number of things for a municipality to issue bonds, such as debt limits and things like that. But the DCED also has some forms that have to be completed. But again, generally, the process on the ground is more of a policy decision left up to the local government, as opposed to some sort of a statutorily prescribed process that they have to follow. So given that it is a policy consideration, here's a number of considerations that local government leadership should consider if they do in fact choose to go and issue a tokenized municipal bond and figure that process out. They would probably need to educate their public on to get a successful issuance, or if not educate them, at least make the user experience of purchasing one of these bonds very seamless. You don't want to try to put out, raise $4 million and only raise $500 because only one person was willing to invest because they couldn't figure out how to use the program. And these things are also best for smaller issuances in either larger municipalities or more tech-forward municipalities. We've seen a lot of these kinds of bonds, these mini bonds and things like that, issued in amounts of less than $10 million. It might require local government to update their technology, which could be an expense, and it allows broad public support for local development initiatives because it provides a means for local people to invest in their community locally. A lot of times we'll see this sort of butting heads of developers and residents in a town or in a city because the city residents feel like they don't have any control over the development. So by creating an avenue for individuals within the community to fund community initiatives, it gives them equity in the community, and it helps to kind of reduce that tension. Again, like I mentioned, it helps to keep local bond repayment dollars local, circulating throughout the economy, stimulating growth. And by expanding the bond market, you're unlocking these local pools of capital that we didn't have before. So, if you have a middle income household that wants to invest in municipal bonds, but they might not have $5,000 to drop up front, they can purchase maybe 500, maybe 1,000. And so now you have far more people available to invest in these things. It has the potential to reduce the government's interest rates, like I mentioned, because you are expanding the supply of investors, so you're going to see that interest rate drop. And finally, the local government continues to have control over the investment agenda. It's just the means of how that's funded is what changes. So the government is still ultimately the one that says what projects will be funded. And in conclusion, it would be nice to see tokenized municipal bonds be considered as Pennsylvania continues to look forward to regulating cryptocurrency and different new technologies coming out. And thank you so much for allowing me to speak today.
Well, Seth, thank you so much for being a part of the program. And are you going to be able to hang around for some Q&A for a little bit?
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Seth. Okay, Lynne Shedlock and Patty Moorhead of the Pennsylvania Economy League will now present their research on local government tax flexibility through case studies that demonstrate the financial challenges and successes faced by core communities. And I will leave it up to the two ladies as to who wants to go first.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon. I am Lynne Shedlock. I am a communications director and researcher for the Pennsylvania Economy League. And with me is...
I'm Patty Moorhead. I'm the chief number cruncher at the Economy League. My title is Director of Data and Financial Analytics.
She has a very fancy title that I never remember. The presentation today is based on a report that we did for the Pennsylvania Municipal League that is actually being released this week. It's going to be released in conjunction with PML's conference in Pittsburgh. So you can find that online. It's on their website, and it is also on our website. So just a little bit about our organization. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy organization. We've been around for over 80 years. We basically focus on three things. We have technical assistance, we have independent research, and then we also do civic education. And so this report kind of taps all of those buckets. So I started out with this quote, how did we get here? And this is a quote from Greg Wilson, the Lock Haven city manager, who is in the position of having to reduce his 24/7 police in a small college town because they don't have the money. So this presentation is about tax flexibility, or I should say inflexibility, and about the lack of revenue options that municipalities have. We're not necessarily going to focus as much on expenditures here. So the first thing we're going to look at is Act 511 of 1965, right? So Act 511 came in trying to corral this Wild West tax anything attitude of the earlier period, okay? And there were some really good goals that Act 47, or excuse me, that Act 511 was trying to do. They wanted to produce additional revenue. They wanted to grant property tax relief, spur economic development, recoup the costs of services from non-resident workers, and provide more of an elastic tax base that responds more quickly to economic conditions. At the time, it was seen as progressive because it tapped into other sources than property, other than sales tax was one of the few exceptions. All of these sources, though, were capped at either an amount or a rate. It also limited the tax authorization mostly to the wealth within a municipality. You know, we've heard of that little boxes kind of theory, except for non-resident workers in some very limited ways. And it also presumed that there was more population, more commerce, and more robust services needed in your urban areas than in your rural areas. Now, over on the side of this slide, we have a little comparison there of, you know, the number situation and what it was like in 1965. And you can see in terms of the salaries, the bread, the gas, way less, right, than what we're paying right now. However, all of these taxing authorizations were all capped or limited. So the occupational privilege tax, which came as part of this whole tax package, at the time was $10. It was renamed and increased to $52 and now is the LST. However, with inflation, that $10 really should be at least $80 today. And the local services tax funds, the idea behind it is to fund our local services. So basically that's $52, that's $1 a week that we are asking our workers within the municipality to pay for services, which of course we know is a drop in the bucket. All right, so what's happened since then? They have failed to provide the municipal code, which provides such property tax authorizations, and Act 511, which provides most of the rest of the tax authorizations, have have not provided adequate flexible revenue options that recognize the modern realities, which is we aren't all living in our own little municipality. And a lot of us have moved out of those urban areas and into the suburban areas, and we're all living regionally. The population dropped in our urban cores, and that left them with lower income residents and mostly older, lower value real estate that does not respond well to the property system. And then at the same time, they have to pay for all these robust services. In addition, we have a large number of tax exempt institutions that gravitate towards these regional hubs, right? That eats up taxable land. And then, of course, all of these taxes failed to keep up with inflation. As a result, what has happened? Urban cores have become over-reliant on property tax because that's usually the only tax that they can raise. That's a problem also because the county and the school district are also very heavily reliant on property taxes. So you have everybody pretty much pulling from that same tax base. The other problem is our assessment system. Property taxes don't keep up with expenditures, in part because of our inadequate and uneven property system, which doesn't allow revenue to grow from those millages. This slide just shows you the population trend. So you see the city in the blue and the second class township in the sort of orangey yellow. And in 1960, we had the majority of residents in Pennsylvania were in a city or even in a borough, a more urban setting, more densely populated setting. And then you can see by 2020, what has happened. The population has moved to the second class townships, which leaves our urban cores without the people that used to pay for all of those services. And now I'm going to turn it over to Patty.
Okay, so sorry about that. The city manager in Hermitage uses EIT. He says that's their main source of revenue, and that's been historically stable. And because of home rule, they were able to get that information or get that tax. So the 511 taxes, there's a lot of these, as Lynn said, that are capped at rates from 1965. For example, the per capita at $10, and that's subject to sharing with the school district. So think about that. If you had to pay somebody for a quarter of an hour at $15 an hour, that's like $2.50 of the $5 that the municipality would net from that per capita tax. The local services tax, they raised that to $52. Again, that's subject to sharing with the school districts. Earned income tax does grow with growing wages. However, that again is capped at the rate at the 0.5% for municipalities. Some of these other ones are, again, just not really productive taxes. Okay, so as you can see, in 1990, the way the taxes were distributed was the majority was property taxes for just about everybody, except for Philadelphia, who has special legislation for earned income tax and they've had that for a while. Pittsburgh was heavily reliant on real estate taxes in 1990, but they've gotten some extra flexibility now in their taxes. So you can see the shift of where the taxes are coming from, what revenue producers. In the rest of the municipalities, they're pretty much the same as they were, the mix since 1990. So how do you get more tax flexibility? The big one is home rule. This, I call it an onerous process. It has to go on the ballot. Not only when you put it on the ballot, you have to at the same time pick all of the representatives for the government study commission. If either of those fail, guess what? Home rule's out at that point. Then it's just a very, very onerous process. Act 47 gives municipalities special taxing ability when they're in distress. But guess what? They have to get to the point where they're in distress to be able to get this. And once they get it, a lot of times, the residents don't notice the extra 0.5% in their paycheck every week. But then to keep it, even though they've gone through everything else, they have to go through this home rule process, which is crazy. Act 205 allows for additional earned income tax if your pensions are distressed. And then Act 130 was a law that took the old occupation tax, which was based on a millage or whatever, and you could change that revenue. You could up your earned income tax by the percentage that would equal the revenue that you gave up for giving up the occupation tax. So that's what they kind of do with these taxes. So Lynn touched a little on property tax and assessments. One thing is the age of housing. As you can see in this slide, most of the housing built in the urban cores was built prior, like you see the big growth there back in 1939 or earlier. Through the 90s and 2000s, you saw some big growth out in the townships. But now, since then, everything's kind of new housing growth, new housing stock has kind of gone down. And the thing about the housing stock in the townships, they're newer homes, so they're assessed at a higher value than the buildings that are in the core centers. Property assessment. So this is the property assessment. This chart shows what the various ranges in the last time properties were assessed in a county. There are 13 that have pre-1980 assessments. The oldest is Franklin County, and then Lackawanna County, Lynn's neighborhood, 1968, and they are currently undergoing a assessment. We'll see if it happens. They started once before and stopped. But in Franklin County, 1961, the assessed value of a property is about 13% of what the market value is. And in Lackawanna County, again, 12.6. So currently, what do I want to say? Contrary to popular belief, if I bought a house in 1989 and it was worth $50,000 and I sold it today for $150,000, more than that assessed value will still be at $50,000 for the next owner of that property. There is no spot assessment in Pennsylvania. The values stay what the values are unless there's some kind of significant improvement. Okay, you're up.
All right, so that's better. As part of this project, we did 8 municipal case studies. We are not going to do all 8 here, but we're starting out with the city of Bradford, which happens to be somebody that we just finished up a report for and is in a world of hurt. So the city of Bradford is a full-service urban core city in a rural county. It's lost 11,000 people since its peak. It's lost a 1,000 in the 10-year last census period. Its residents are poorer than their neighbors, but they pay higher taxes. And when I say full service, I mean they have full-time fire and full-time police. They are over-reliant on their property taxes at 70% of their total taxes. They've cut staff, they've reduced services, they've deferred capital and maintenance projects. Their latest thing was they obtained a pension bond. It still is not enough. They've raised taxes twice in 5 years, produced less than 130,000 in new annual revenue. That goes to the assessment issue. You might be able to raise your taxes, but how much are you getting for that value of a mill? We have a community right now, it's a very small borough, but they only get like $9,000 for a mill. Like, you raise a mill, what is that even gonna get you? So they have raised taxes, and they do have increased annual deficits projected, despite the fact that they've done this recent pension bond. And you can see, here's a couple graphics for them. You see their age of their housing stock. A huge amount of their housing stock is older housing, so they have a lot of blight issues. You can also see the median value of the housing is lower than both the county and the state. City of Lancaster. We revisit the city of Lancaster. City of Lancaster has a lovely, thriving downtown. They have a great urban hub, lots of significant economic development, but it has not translated to revenues. They have eliminated staff, they've reduced services, refinanced debt, they get money from their utilities, you know, on and on. They did not have a business tax, and of course at this point under Pennsylvania law, they can't get one. They did trade their occupation tax, and they got 0.1 EIT increase, which sounds pretty small, but you actually can get, you know, big amounts from small EIT increases. So it helps. So they have 11.7 mills in the city compared to 1 to 2 mills in the townships. So what happens? People get money and they tend to move out into the townships. Particularly, there's a township that is in the same school district as the city. And the only reason they didn't have a property tax this year was because of the American Rescue Plan, which I can tell you is happening all over our municipalities. Here's a couple graphics for them. You see the city's population has stagnated. Everybody around them has grown, but they have not. And then you can see the median housing values and how much higher they are compared to the city. City of Lock Haven, another full service urban core city, home to Lock Haven University. The university is tax exempt. The students are there, generally contribute no revenue, but because you do have that student population, you need to have pretty robust services like police. What we found on average is that college towns receive less revenue than municipalities without a university, even though they do normally have to have these robust services. Lots of renters because of the students. They have structural deficits. And again, they are looking at reducing their full-time police. Here's a couple slides from them. You see the light blue is the renter population. And you can see the median values of their housing is lower than their neighbors in the state. Hermitage. Hermitage is very interesting. Hermitage is actually is a city, but in actuality, it's a township. It started as a first-class township and became a city. Hermitage is doing gangbusters. Hermitage went to home rule and they increased their EIT. And they have not raised their property tax in years and years. They have a wealthy tax base. They have lots of room for development. This is in contrast to their neighbors, Sharon and Farrell, which are both old urban core cities that also raised their EIT, but even with doing that, could not come up with sufficient revenue because their residents are poorer. And here's a couple graphics from that. You can see where Hermitage overtakes Farrell and Sharon. We have a lot of population loss in those cities, and see the wealth measurements. Look at how much Hermitage is over the other two communities. And remember, in Pennsylvania, we only tax basically what's within the borders. Okay, so now we're going to look at some potential models for tax flexibility. Mostly, one of the things, earned income tax is a biggie in terms of flexibility, but there are other models as well. So first, we're going to look at Pittsburgh. The state provided a lot of new revenue options for Pittsburgh as it underwent distress. One of the first things was this local services tax that was originally done for Pittsburgh, but generously went out to all of the municipalities. Again, it hasn't been increased since that, but, oh, and it's also subject to sharing with the school district, of course. Pittsburgh, Allegheny has a regional sales tax that pays for regional assets. A lot of our third-class cities have those same kinds of regional assets, right? That really could benefit from some sort of a regional tax that could help pay for them, that would take them off the books. Those assets were taken off of Pittsburgh's books, plus they were given money, as were other municipalities in Allegheny County based on a formula. The third one was the updated business taxes. Pittsburgh was given the payroll prep tax. The only municipalities that can get the more modern business tax is those that are in Act 47. Currently, we have two municipalities that have made that switch. As a result of this, Pittsburgh's revenue mix changed substantially in 2019. Remember, we're looking pre-pandemic, okay? Their property taxes dropped from 50% of total taxes to only 30%. The other category went up to 30% of the total taxes. That includes parking, the payroll tax, and the sales tax. And also, we have the Allegheny County drink tax, which funds the Port Authority. And some of you will remember that when there was talk of Act 47, when there was Act 47 reform several years ago, the drink tax was something that was part of the discussion and did not make it into the reform. And Patty will finish up with the other sources.
Okay. So what do we have for recommendations for tax flexibility? Eliminate or raise the caps like earned income tax. Earned income tax is the extended amounts are available for once you get into distress or your pensions are in distress or going through the home rule process, which again is a very onerous process. So if we were able to raise that tax prior to these municipalities getting into distress, it would be helpful. I truly believe that if they had more flexibility there, some of the stress would not be there. increase the flat fees services to keep up with inflation. Maybe have some kind of inflator on them that's tied to CPI or something like that. Provide additional authorization for non-tax to tax the commuters into a municipality. Harrisburg got to keep their LST at the increased rate for after they got out of Act 47. You know, when you're in Act 47 or 205, you get those get to be able to tax the people who use your services during the day. 1/3 of their time during the week is spent in the cities or in the urban cores. And then the last thing is to somehow mandate regular property tax assessments. Like I said, if you bought a house in 1990 for $50,000 and your county has not reassessed, the next person who buys your house for $200,000 is still paying based on that $50,000 assessment. So that's what we think. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn, Patty, and Seth, for your magnificent presentations. At this time, we will open it up to any questions that anyone may have. I don't see any questions on the screen. You know, that can mean that I remember one time, ladies, I gave a presentation, and at the conclusion of my presentation, the moderator said, "You either did a good job or you confused the hell out of them." So I think that you did I think for the reason for no questions is that you did a good job, because it was very, do you have a question, sir? The gentleman standing at the mic.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. My first question's for Seth. You had mentioned one of the benefits of using the tokenized bonds might be trying to increase community benefit by being able to sell them to folks within the community. And I imagine, since everything's digital, are you seeing folks who are trying to limit who they sell bonds to within municipality or a state, so that it's not going back to very savvy investment banks or blockchain investors, but like, well, we want to raise $1 million, but we want to do it and pay it back into? Is there a way to geo-limit, or have you seen folks geo-limiting where those bonds can be purchased?
So one of the things that Berkeley's trying to do is, one of the ideas that they have is to distribute interest payments in the bonds in a sort of digital asset that can only be spent in the Berkeley core, or in the city of Berkeley. So that's one way that they're trying to keep those dollars local. But no, as far as limiting who can invest, I don't think we've seen that yet.
Okay.
That being said, we haven't seen a tokenized municipal bond yet either. So that could be an idea to put down on the paper.
That was a very mind-expanding presentation. So thanks for bringing that possibility up. I guess the other question would be, is the idea that you have to purchase them using a blockchain token like Bitcoin or Ethereum or something?
No, you can be able to, I think, purchase them in US dollars, or you can exchange a US dollar for some sort of specific digital coin made for that bond, made for the bond process. And you can do it that way. I would hope that we don't see bonds being bought in Bitcoin or something like that. I think that can lead to some volatility risk and stuff like that. But, cities can create their own coin technically and be able to distribute it that way. So I think there's both the US dollar route and a digital coin route available, if that answers your question.
It does. I'm
Okay.
still pretty new to blockchain stuff, so it's a lot of basic questions to chew on in terms of how the heck it works.
Yeah.
And then my next question's for Lynne and Patty. You had talked a lot about some of the challenges with tax flexibility and how the Act 511 provisions aren't necessarily working for a lot of core communities in particular. But one of the challenges that we have in Philadelphia, where I live, is where we have like the most flexibility in the entire state with the Sterling Act, is that we still have 26% poverty, and so poor communities are going to be poor regardless of whether you're using EIT or property or business receipts tax. The flexibility does help, but I was wondering if you had looked into one of the other issues around just the tax base moving outside to the exurbs, which your presentation had a lot of wonderful data on. But I mean, in your recommendations, did you take a look at solutions around like regionalized taxes redistributed through formula, or any sort of right sizing what the community is now, which is not just that core community, but is all of the suburbs and exurbs around them? Because it seems like that is a big piece of why the tax provisions under Act 511 are no longer working for those core communities.
Let's not go too crazy. Okay. Yeah, we can talk about regionalizing the tax base and regionalizing services. And certainly that is one of the issues. The issue is that, and the first I want to say, we didn't deal with Philadelphia. Philadelphia, you're like your own little a little thing in Philadelphia. But I will say that if you saw the the graphic that we had on the tax mix, Philadelphia is over, I think it's EIT, right? They're over reliant on EIT. One of the things that we're looking for in this mix is to have a balance, and Philadelphia is not balanced, right? It's out of whack. And the money ties into the service provision. So yeah, certainly we would like to see more regional, we mentioned the commuter taxes. If services were provided on a regional basis, right, should we tax in a regional way? But at the moment, they aren't provided on a regional basis, unless you happen to be in one of the municipalities that has regionalized, and that isn't really happening much. You heard Mary Jane talk about that. We've talked about home rule counties and the idea of forming a service district and taking a percentage of the taxation, whatever, to pay for that that district. I definitely think regional options, regional taxation is something that should be considered. What we looked at in terms of the recommendations for this report are things that are already existing in the system. Like I said, let's not go too crazy. We're Pennsylvania. So everything that we pointed to here has an example. And it's mostly that we just limit who is able to tap into these various sources. Again, Philadelphia is is kind of its own little animal. So.
But what I would say is, like, Philadelphia is its own animal. But if you look over like the big span of time, you saw Philadelphia go into this thing. You saw, or go into like where they needed special provisions. You saw Pittsburgh go to where they need special provisions. You saw Scranton. Okay, those are your big ones. Well, now it's starting to trickle down to the urban cores of the boroughs, and so we like to see those municipalities get some flexibility before they go into a distress mode, and something drastic. Unfortunately, some of the laws in Pennsylvania don't allow for too much. Mergers and border change laws are kind of onerous as well as, and the just and to form a service district, it takes a lot of, as Mary Jane said, political will. I mean, people do not want to give up their little control of their area, their police, their fire.
And you have to look where the wealth is. The wealth is in the second-class townships. We didn't talk about the second-class townships. They're doing fine, right? If you want to change the system and change the tax law, you have to look at where the wealth went. which is the population slide, right? We assumed that all the wealthy people were in the city and everybody else was a farmer. My old boss used to say that all the time. It isn't like that, that's not, we have people who live in second class, very wealthy people who live in second class townships who deliberately do not pay for their police services, who deliberately, could afford it and still, use state police. So.
Well, thank you very much. Are you going to share your slides with the local government commission folks? Because the data is incredible. I would love to be able
Yes,
to take
and
a
the
look
and
at
the report's on our website.
Oh.
So,
I agree. It was an outstanding presentation. And Seth, I'll have two questions, but first for Seth, I'll go back to sit down after the second question. Could you, blockchain, you did a great explanation. There has to be a downside, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the downside of that. And I'll go to my second question then. You talked about the earned income tax. Pennsylvania is an aging population. Our workforce participation rate is going downhill. So increasingly that tax is relying on the workers. We have an aging population. They have unearned income. What did you look at taxing all income rather than just earned income? I know the sky's the limit. You had that caveat, but did you look at that? Thank you.
For this report, we did not look at the personal tax versus the earned income tax. We're looking at available options and how to modify those to and yeah, we did. We do know that the population is aging as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And there's some work being done on the national level with GFOA and the National League of Cities and some other organizations who are doing, they have some very interesting reports looking at that issue that particularly in terms of property, how outdated and sort of to our modern friend here, right? But to look at, what's a more modern way of taxing.
I think with respect to the downside of blockchain, I'm a big proponent of blockchain. I think the underlying software is very, very beneficial, but I guess the downside would largely be market acceptance. I think teaching people how it works and getting it out there and being able to weave it throughout different things in society, different processes, is going to be difficult. A lot of other people have been discussing blockchain's use for recording deeds and keeping track of property records. That can be done. But then again, it's the development of it too. So I think we're on the cusp of seeing this kind of technology moving throughout society more fluidly. But as of right now, I think we're still kind of trying to understand it and trying to figure out where exactly it can go. And there are a few specific areas like municipal bonds and property records and things that have been a little bit more fleshed out than others, but there's a lot of different ways that we can use it. But again, the market acceptance, I think, is going to be your largest downside. But the technology itself, the underlying blockchain is great, I think.
So you talked about a home selling for $150,000 now that in 1989 was assessed at $50,000. It is still now being assessed at $50,000. What are the challenges of properties that have improvements or new builds that still need to be assessed at a 1970 or 1970 or 1960s assessment within those constraints?
I used to work for a county. I used to work for Lackawanna County. It's a mess. I mean, I can't even tell you, I work for Lackawanna County. My commissioners were the ones that stopped the reassessment. Okay. We told people it was because it was too expensive. It wasn't because it was too expensive. Okay. And it hasn't been reassessed since 1968. Reports from what was done in 1968 where they just like grab, this is Lackawanna County, right? They grab their random political cronies. Hey, let's drive by the houses and, there was no rhyme or reason. So it's, basically I think our assessment system is a mess. I think, based on my experience in my county, the politically connected were able to get reductions and assessed value with no problem. And it's, and yes, the problem compounds because the assessments were never really done correctly to begin with. So it's not fair.
So also to get in and go look and see if somebody updated their kitchen or not in a house, two houses, you look at them from the outside, they're the same, but one substantially updated the inside of their house, the other one didn't. If they took out the proper permits, maybe you could get to update that assessment. But if they didn't, if they just, the husband, his buddy came over and they had a couple beers and fixed the kitchen, you're never going to see that. So, but then when they go to sell it, it would still be assessed at the lower amount because you can't, the spot assessment is illegal in Pennsylvania.
Morning. Good afternoon. There was a great session last year at the symposium from a gentleman, I believe, from West Virginia, and I think we could go on for years nonstop to talk about reassessment. I'm from Blair County, where we did finally reassess for the first time since 1958. Gave some of those same reasons. From a county perspective, we like a little flexibility, not a little more flexibility. We just like some flexibility because real estate is really our only tax revenue. I wonder if you've done much study. You've talked a lot about taxes and flexibility of taxes that you could levy or increase, and some of that makes some sense. Any flat rate tax, when you have inflation, the cost of everything goes up and the tax doesn't go up. But at least with earned income tax, it's a percentage, and that does go up. One of my concerns is with a lot of the nuisance taxes, and they're called nuisance taxes for a reason because they certainly are, is the cost of collections, because we still have an incredibly fractured collection system outside of Act 32. And Act 32, I think, was one of the most incredible, successful reforms in tax collection, probably in Pennsylvania history. And I would love to see, and I might be in a minority, but I would love to see that expanded to include, and this would obviously take legislation, certainly beyond earning income tax to all the 511 taxes, and then potentially even real estate tax, and that's another something that we'll tackle. But like for a while, one of our municipalities levied $5 in per capita tax, and the school district levied $5 in per capita tax from two different collectors. I mean, it was literally costing, and some of the taxes that they still levy, literally half of the tax is spent on collection, and that's just ridiculous. So I just wondered if you had any comments on that or anything, but thank you.
When we're working with a lot of our 47s, and especially ones that go to home rule, we suggest they eliminate their nuisance taxes because they do cost more to collect than probably they even generate.
Yeah, so when we go in and we work with municipalities, a lot of times municipalities do want to get rid of the per capita, and our recommendation is throw it into the millage, whatever you're collecting. But some of the problem in getting rid of it is that the school district gets their half, and the school district's not necessarily going to give it up, and well, we got to collect it anyway, whatever. Of the 8 municipalities that we surveyed for this report, 6 of them have given up the per capita. And I will tell you that I spoke with Omar in Altoona, and his quote I have in the report is about the per capita tax, because he's laughing. He's like, why am I giving from out of state? Why am I giving $10 to the city? They don't understand these strange taxes. But yeah, they're not really worth keeping on the books.
Okay, I want to thank you all very much for your questions. I also want to, certainly I want to thank and express appreciation to the members of the panel, Lynn and Patty and Seth and Dr. Medvic. I want to thank all of you. I really appreciate those of you who are participating remotely, as well as those of you who are in person down at our illustrious Capitol. And in closing, I really want to thank, I'm on my last rodeo. I'm heading out the door. And I got to tell you that I had no idea what the local government commission did as, until I got involved as the chair of local government. And I want to express my gratitude to, I hope I don't forget anybody, but to David, to Christopher, to Julia, to Martin, to Jaron, to Sonia, and to Karen for the great job that you do and the part that you play in government. You folks can be very proud of what you do. And I believe that now, if I'm correct, Dave, if I'm correct, I believe now you guys are going to take a break. Do I got that right?
That's correct, Representative. It's time for a break, and thank you so much for moderating this portion of our program. It's always great to see you.
Good to see you too. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the beautiful day that we're having outside.
To our online folks, we'll be switching to the last of the 4 Zoom links for the last session, coming up at 2:30.